And it's really great to see the Welsh trade union movement taking a lead on on this issue, especially since yesterday Wales finally committed to reaching a zero carbon by 2050. That's quite a challenge. Transport accounts for 16% of Wales's greenhouse gases at the moment, and it's resisted all attempts to reduce it. In fact, in 2016, our transport emissions actually went up. Over half of those transport emissions are accounted for by the private car, and Wales is neck and neck with the West Midlands in being the region with the highest number of people in the UK who travel to work. So if we're going to meet this huge environmental challenge of reducing climate change, then changing the way in which we travel to work is really important. But sustainable travel, certainly in Wales, where sustainability is defined by the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, isn't just about climate change and the environment. It's also about health. And our over-reliance on the car has had some dire consequences, particularly in the way in which we've become an incredibly physically inactive country. We are the least active in part of the United Kingdom, including amongst our children. And that's given rise to a whole range of illnesses such as diabetes and heart disease. And of course, emissions from vehicles aren't just affecting our climate, they're also shortening our lives. The emissions from vehicles, particulate matter from brakes, and particularly NO2 from diesel, is one of the major causes of death across Europe, and probably accounts for 2,500 deaths in Wales each year. The way we travel is also a key issue in bringing about a just transition. For decades now, we have planned our communities on the basis that everybody's going to drive, which has left the 23% of households in Wales who don't have access to a car marginalised. The main reason we've seen such a decline in public transport, and in Wales public transport is mainly buses, is because of the rise of the car. Once somebody owns a car, they don't use a bus, which is great if you've got a car, but if you haven't, you've got a problem. And it means that lots of people can't access workplaces. This particularly applies to younger people and of course to poorer people. And ironically, it's the poorer people who are most likely to suffer from the emissions from the cars from the wealthier people, because it tends to be poorer people who live next to the busy roads. So changing people's travel habits is important. It really matters to us as trade unionists, but it's not easy. For many people, particularly in rural areas, the car is their only viable means of transport. And there's also a huge industry reinforcing our love affair with the automobile and the lifestyle that goes with it. When I was writing this, I started thinking about what my dad's reaction would have been if the NUM had told him that he should leave his car home and use his bike to get back into his 8-hour shift at Slimy and Colliery. I don't think he'd have been too impressed. But actually, things moved on a lot since then. His car was only one of only two in our street. We didn't know any children with asthma. The people with breathing problems were almost always minors. I only knew one child who was overweight. We all played outside and we all walked to school. I mean, it wasn't idyllic, but it was a damn sight healthier. However, if we are going to convince fellow members that our over-reliance on the car has to change, we're not going to do it by shouting at them about how terrible the car is. It's important we understand the arguments, but the reality is the way that we're going to change people's minds is by making them aware of the practicalities and the possibilities of using these better alternatives. And that's what this toolkit sets out to do. Unlike my dad, most of us don't do physical labor, but our minds and bodies really need exercise. And more people are starting to realize that if they can make their commute into their exercise, it's a lot cheaper in time and money than driving to a gym and then sitting on a static bicycle, trying to get some exercise that way. And this is particularly true of younger people. And this agenda is very much in tune with the younger people who we desperately need to get involved in trade unions, because increasingly they either can't afford to or don't really want to get involved in the financial commitment that owning a car involves. When it comes to getting people to make a change, small details make a big difference. That's why the survey in the toolkit is so important. If you can find out the barriers that are stopping people trying alternatives to the car, you can try to address them or ask the employer to do so. For many people, a car means convenience. The more convenient you can make the alternatives, the more likely people are to use them. And the most effective advocates for change will probably be your members who already walk or cycle to work. Encouraging them to pass on their tips to others, perhaps even organizing informal discussions can be really effective. One of the case studies I did involved talking to people who are involved in the Welsh Government Bicycle User Group, who are doing an amazing amount of work in trying to get more and more people to travel to work sustainably. The guide also lists, the toolkit also lists organizations who are very willing to speak to trade union reps about how these changes can be made, such as Cycling UK and Travel Line Cymru, who organize information about buses. The research shows that the biggest barrier to people traveling more actively, particularly cycling, is safety. Essentially, how can they avoid conflict with traffic? Your local council should be happy to provide you with maps of the area showing the safer routes. And if there aren't any routes, this year is an excellent time to ask for them. Because of the Active Travel Act, this year every local authority is having to put in place its plans, not all immediate, but its plans for providing safe walking and cycling routes to people's workplaces and to schools. So now is a really good time to get in touch with the council if you've got people who want to travel more sustainably to work. And finally, there's some real money backing up these maps. Earlier this week, Welsh Government announced a £20 million increase in its budget for active travel, bringing it up to a total of 55 million for next year. It's important as well to remember that you don't have to change every journey to make an impact. Small changes will make a difference. There was a recent report from Oxford University which showed that switching just one trip per day from car driving to cycling reduces a person's carbon footprint by about half a ton over a year. That's 1/8 of the global average carbon footprint. So if you can get 8 of your members to make that change, you've offset your own entire carbon footprint for a year. To finish, I'd just like to say a few words about public transport and COVID. Obviously, at the moment, it can be difficult to promote bus and train use, but it's essential that as soon as we can, we get people back into the habit of using public transport again. The guide is full of advice on how best to do this. Trade unions have campaigned for years to get the train companies brought back into public ownership. That's now happened in Wales, and we need to make sure that people start using its services again as soon as possible. Thank you.